Welcome to Franklin Covey's C-Suite Conversations. My name is Patrick Leddin, and I have the honor of being your host on this podcast. Each week, I have the opportunity to sit down and talk to an executive about their life, their work, and what they've learned along the way. We talk about their struggles and also their successes so that you, the listener, can learn from both. Today, I'm joined by Ken Natori, the president of Natori, an iconic East meets West fashion brand. The company was started by his mom, Josie, back in the late 1970s, and Ken has joined the company and made his own impact along the way. In our conversation, you'll learn about the decisions he made early on in his career and what he's learned over the course of time so that you can apply these insights to whatever matters most to you. Ken Natori, welcome to Franklin Covey's C-Suite Conversations.
Great to be here, Patrick. Always great to see you.
Great to see you too. You know, it's funny. I've had a chance to talk to you over the years. I've known you for quite a while now, Ken, and we've had a chance to chat on the phone over time, meet in person. But the people listening to the podcast may not benefit from the same understanding of who Ken Natori is. So if you don't mind, would you dial the clock back a couple of decades and tell us a little bit about how you got from wherever you were then to where you are now?
Oh, wow. Okay, I will do that. We'll go with a couple minute version here. So I am currently president of Natori. We're a high-end women's fashion brand. Very excited to be celebrating our 47th year as an independent family business. The founder, Josie Natori, is my mother. She is 77 years, still going strong. So we spend a lot of time together running our family business. It has been a circuitous route for me to get here. I'm an only child, and throughout my life, I was very determined to carve my own path because my interests were different. My dream in college was actually to be an anchor on SportsCenter, and so I pursued a broadcast journalism dream. I did that by getting an internship at Bloomberg in New York. I was born and raised in New York. I knew I didn't want to work in a small market, and I had heard that Bloomberg gave opportunities for people even without experience to make their way on air. So I took an internship there, was fortunate to make my way on air, doing radio and some television. And by the end of my 5-year career there, I was actually reporting from the floor of the stock exchange every morning. And I really actually developed a real love of financial news. And so I was at Bloomberg overall for 5 years. I had a great job. I loved it. But ultimately, I decided that, I was worried that I was putting all my eggs in the broadcast journalism basket. Some people some broadcast journalists make it huge. Others don't. And it can be a tough lifestyle. And so I made the decision to apply to business school. Was fortunate enough to get into Stanford. And that kind of changed my path. So I spent 2 years on the West Coast. But even out of business school, I had no interest or thought that I would join the company, and I worked on Wall Street for a couple of years, which my parents met on Wall Street actually before my mother started the company, and it wasn't until 2007 when I decided that me ignoring this opportunity to help pave the future of a business didn't really make any sense. And so I spoke to my parents. It was a couple of years after I graduated from business school in 2005 and joined Natori in 2007, really learned the business from scratch. It was not something that we spent a lot of time talking about at home. And I've been there for the last 17 years. And so we continue our journey in a difficult fashion business. But really, I love the people I work with. I love our mission, and the environment can be tough, but we're certainly enjoying it and doing our best.
Was it as crazy on the floor of the stock exchange as it always seems to be whenever they cut to the reporter on the floor, just kind of mania surrounding them? Is that what it was like?
Well, it was funny because I worked the morning drive. So I was mostly on radio. And so I was on air from like 5 until 11 a.m. And the radio booth was actually overseeing the floor. So I wasn't like deep, and I would go down the floor sometimes whenever there'd be TV stuff and stuff like that. But back then it was certainly, more, more chaotic than it is now. But it's funny, when you're in that sort of broadcast journalist mode, it's kind of tough to be distracted. Like you're in it thinking about, the news that you're trying to convey. So it was a fun, frenetic environment. I always really enjoyed the atmosphere, and whether it was reporting from the floor or doing anything, I found that being on live TV has always provided this kind of adrenaline rush. I'm actually doing this podcast, ironically, from We Sell on TV, And I'm up in Canada. We sell on the Shopping Channel, and I'm in between shows. I just got off air about half hour ago, and I enjoy it. I frankly prefer reporting on financial news than hawking women's fashion, but both of them provide this kind of adrenaline rush, and doing stuff like this. It's actually probably one of my favorite parts of my job currently.
Well, people listen to this podcast because they are interested in hearing what executives have to say about their life and their career and what they've learned along the way. And I'm just curious, from early on in your career, you saw yourself going one way, and we'll talk a little bit later on about the business you're in now and how you've been working to continue to build on that iconic brand that Josie started. But what was it like when you decided, okay, I'm going to move away from this particular path and go into another one? Did you feel like there was part of you were leaving behind, or a dream you were living behind, or did you feel like I'm really embracing something different? Because there's people that are at those crossroads right now themselves.
Yeah, it was funny. So I told you I went to business school. I took a family business class in business school, not because I ever thought I would join the business, just because I kind of found it interesting. And the main messages from that class were, before you join a family business, have deep conversations, talk about compensation, talk about a 3-year plan, talk about equity, talk about a 10-year plan, do all of these things. And that's not really how my family operates. And it's not really what we did. I just kind of things were crazy. My then girlfriend, now wife, we moved to New York from Stanford in 2005. Life got real from going to this graduate school environment in Northern California to, working at an investment bank, being in New York. Life was getting real. And I was like, oh my God, this is a lot right now. And so the decision to move probably could have been more thought out. It certainly could have been discussed more, like I said, coming up with clear expectations on both sides, both from, my mother and me, in terms of what the path would look like. And so things have worked out, great for the most part. But I think being really thoughtful about everything, really, weighing the pros and cons and coming up with a plan and sort of sticking to that plan. In hindsight, I probably should have paid attention more to the learnings from that family business course.
I think it worked out pretty darn well for you. Now, you mentioned that your mom and dad met on Wall Street, but it wasn't like they were strolling down the street and they bumped into each other, right? Your mom specifically was charting a pretty amazing course career-wise, and she went through a transition herself. Is that right?
She did. She's gone through multiple transitions. So she was born and raised in the Philippines. She came to the States for college. She went to Manhattanville, college up in Westchester, started her career on Wall Street, and quickly worked her way up the ladder quite quickly. She was actually the first female vice president of investment banking at Merrill Lynch. Very impressive, and gave birth to me in 1976. Not to date myself. But had this job to go back to. But the Philippines is both a very entrepreneurial and also a very matriarchal culture. So lots of strong women, lots of strong female business owners. And as she went back to work, she was like, I need to do my own thing in order to really be happy. And so she, they met on a blind date on Wall Street. I joke they were like the two Asian people on Wall Street in the early 70s. But as she was working, they looked at things on the weekends for her to do to start her own company, and fashion was not at the top of the list. They looked at everything from opening a car wash to franchising a McDonald's. And then ultimately what happened is someone sent her from the Philippines, sent her some peasant blouses, which is kind of native garb in the Philippines. She cold called a buyer at Bloomingdale's. The buyer, for some reason, accepted that meeting. They met for hours, and at the end of the meeting, the buyer said, if you lengthen some of these blouses, we might be able to sell them in our sleepwear department. And so that was the modest beginnings of the company. My mother had no formal training in anything, but got a team. They lengthened some of these peasant blouses in our living room, and that was the start of the company. And so here we are, 47 years, still operating as an independent family business, which we're quite proud of.
It's an incredible story. I've had a chance to meet your mom and spend a little bit of time at your headquarters up there in New York. And one thing that stood out from just the time I spent with her is just, she's a visionary, she's a creative, she's a powerhouse, and people kind of are attracted to her. And you mentioned her career, the fact that she stepped away from this career that was already on an amazing trajectory. and started knocking on doors to get somebody, a buyer somewhere, to listen to what she has to say about a product. And as I think about that, that's a strong person. That's a strong-willed person, a person with a vision. Whether that's your mom, you're in your kind of joining forces together, or you're some listener on the podcast right now going, yeah, I work with somebody who's got a pretty strong vision, a pretty strong personality. What would you suggest about how do you find your place if you're a listener to this listening saying, okay, I've got a strong boss or a powerful boss or a creative boss, and I'm trying to figure out like how I make my impact?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And everybody has their own risk profile, right? My mother left, as I said, she was the first female vice president of investment banking at Merrill Lynch and left it for complete uncertainty, right? It worked out, but it could have not. That was her path. I have zero risk profile, right? The thought of me leaving anything to uncertainty, is just it's just not in my risk profile. And do I look back at my life and career sometimes and think, God, you could have done. Yeah, I think about this actually. I was at Stanford. I graduated in 2005 because I had a sort of a different background, right? A lot of people had management consulting, investment banking, private equity background. I was a financial news reporter. I was somewhat, to be honest, I was somewhat insecure about my abilities to compete with my classmates for jobs at the end of 2005. And so I had sort of, one of my regrets, and I don't regret much, but one of my regrets is that I had pigeonholed myself even before I got to Stanford saying, okay, I know I can talk about the markets. Like I know I'm comfortable. Like I'm going to come back to New York and go work at a bank. And I did not explore other opportunities because I was like, well, how am I going to compete with these other people who have all this amazing entrepreneurial and banking experience? Like I'm going to go work in capital markets or do something like that. And so that my, over cautious profile, I think, may have squelched some opportunities. It's funny. One of my friends from Stanford who was in a similar boat was like, you know what, I'm just going to apply to different things. She was one of the first employees at Facebook. And so she's doing pretty well. And so it's funny, but I think it's all about, everybody has to be comfortable in their own skin. Some people are comfortable saying, I'm going to risk it all and give it up and start things from scratch. I was probably too cautious, but it's hard to give sort of blanket suggestions, but people have different risk profiles that can play out in different ways.
How do you feel about your risk profile right now in regards to, like, let's say there's somebody listening to the podcast and they say, yeah, I'm a little bit more guarded, or I'm a little bit more aggressive, or whatever they might be, and how they're able to handle risk. I mean, how have you kind of figured out like where you're comfortable with it, and when there might be times that even when it's uncomfortable, you still have to push through a little bit and be a little bit more aggressive?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I would say I'm 48 years old, and I hate to say I feel like I'm over the hill, but in terms of like opportunities come up, right? But in terms of I've got a wife, 14-year-old son, 12-year-old daughter now, and so sometimes opportunities come up. Are floated. I'm part of a great business organization called Young Presidents Organization, or YPO, in my Manhattan chapter, and there are always things people are like, hey, who's looking to do something like this, and I. At a certain point, I, for better or worse, the business is our calling card. It is our family calling card, and so really devoting all of my energy to making sure that we're making the most of it and doing our best. It's a great opportunity. It's a great company. We've got fantastic employees in a difficult environment, and so I really try to focus all of my efforts on maximizing what we can do with Natori.
Well, I want to take you back to when you joined Natori, and I don't want to forget, but I will talk about that difficult environment a little bit later on. But let's talk about when you went back to, or you joined Natori. You had career success yourself. You'd gone back to school. You obviously had the education for it, and you step in. How did you figure out, for lack of a better term, so that people don't go, oh, that's the owner's son? How did you go about kind of making your own mark? Because there's people that are entering into new roles and they're saying, like, how do I make my own mark? People don't know me yet. I want to make sure that they know me, not for where I went to school necessarily, or not for whatever it might be, but know me because of the contribution I'm making.
Yeah. So I was incredibly lucky I'd love to say that this was planned out that way, but it wasn't. But it actually worked perfectly in terms of my entry into Natori. So I certainly was not going to be somebody who just came in day one, asserted myself, especially having not worked in the business before or in the industry, and be like, "This is how we're going to do it. Like, let's do it this way." Like that just wouldn't have been comfortable, and I wouldn't have felt comfortable doing that. Fortunately, when I joined the business in 2007, at that time, we were exclusively wholesale, right? And we exclusively, almost exclusively high-end wholesale. So we sold Natori sleepwear and clothing to Saks, Neiman Marcus, Bloomingdale's, Nordstrom, Bergdorf Goodman, places like that. At the time in 2007, a lot of brands were tasked with figuring out an e-commerce strategy.
Hmm.
And most of these companies were all fashion people, right? They were fashion people, and fashion people and e-commerce people. That's not the same skill set. So I fortunately, and once again, this wasn't planning. This was just good luck. I came to the company at a time when we really needed to figure out, hey, what are we going to do with e-commerce? Are we going to farm it out? Are we going to do it at all? Are we going to do it ourselves? And it was the perfect opportunity for me to figure out a business, show the team that I could execute a business on my own, and really earn my stripes on my own without being under the direct purview of every other person at the company. So, and that was just lucky timing, right? I'd love to say I was like, oh, well, I decided to leave Wall Street and do this because of that. It was just like, oh, wait, I'm here. This is perfect. Like, and so I took that project on my own. I figured out, like, we fortunately decided to do Natori.com in-house. It is now by far, the biggest part of our business. And I so can safely say, like, we wouldn't be where we are without it. And I launched it literally by myself. I spent the first day, we launched it. We were worried when we launched Natori.com, like what would Saks, Nordstrom, and Neiman Marcus say? Would they be upset? So we did it with very little fanfare. We saw if it would work. I was literally packing boxes at the warehouse myself, shipping those first orders that were coming in. We're like, all right. And then, we kind of grew the team from there. So the ability for me to come into the company, earn my stripes, not really ruffle feathers because I was sort of a separate project. Yes, did it ruffle feathers because the sales team, they were worried about like, oh God, what's going to happen to Saks and Neiman's if we're doing Natori.com? But I wasn't directly in people's business. And so I had this ability to come in, prove myself, and do something which was strategically like incredibly important for the company. So the timing of that all really worked out. The site has been, a success from day one. And now, as I mentioned, it's the biggest part of our business. But the timing, I do suggest for anyone joining a business in my shoes, joining a family business, if you can find something like that where you're not just in everybody's business from day one, but maybe developing your own project, showing your stripes that way, that it turned out to be, once again, not by planning, just by good luck, turned out to be a really successful way for me to integrate myself into the business.
One thing I love about you, Ken, that came out in your answers there is your humility. When you say things like, oh, the timing was just right, or it was just good luck, or things like that. But I think the reality is the ability to prepare for moments that you don't even know are going to show up and be ready to execute on them. I find that, career-wise, looking back over the last couple of decades for myself, there's a few moments that are like those big days. And you don't know them sometimes when you're in them. But then in retrospect, you realize, okay, that was a big moment. So this is a big moment for you in launching the business and even kicking the packages out the door in the warehouse the first time because you don't know what's going to happen. What was going on in your mind in that moment where you're like, okay, we're going to press go on this thing. It could tick off who have been our current customers. Our salespeople aren't particularly happy. We've made an investment. Yeah, it was internal, but we probably had to put some serious resources into making this thing happen. It's 2 a.m. I'm in the warehouse. I mean, all those type of things, and you hit go. Was there a moment of you saying, what if nothing happens? It just kind of goes, wah, wah, wah. Or if it just takes off and you can't even handle it. I mean, what was going on in your mind?
Yeah. So the funny thing is, whoever our developer at the time, they sort of, not to get too technical, but they mapped everything, all of Natori.com. So essentially, instead of just mapping our website to Natori.com, they also mistakenly mapped our mail servers and changed our mail servers. So when they did that, people didn't have access to email until for a couple hours. And people were just like, what's going on? I was like, oh my God, this is not a good way to start this. We fixed that. So we were concerned. And like I said, I was very cautious and thoughtful about, not disrupting the existing team. So there was concern, people being like, our sales team, we had account executives that had been working with the department stores for years who felt somewhat of a threat. And so that's, like I said, we did do it quietly, but I was always very conscious about working with the team to say, what are the concerns? And ultimately, it was all net positive. It was all just growing the pot. We always took a approach like it wasn't necessarily Natori.com or die. It was, we just want people to buy a Natori product. And so for example, our customer service team, they weren't tasked with saying, hey, every sale has to go through Natori.com. If we were out of a SKU or out of a size, we would say, hey, you know what? This is available on Nordstrom.com. Go there. This is available at the Bloomingdale's in Chicago, where you're from. Like, go there. So we really, and then also we took towards pricing, to the degree that product would get marked down, we always let the retailers do it first. We never got ahead of them. So because we were thoughtful in terms of how we rolled this out, we were thoughtful about marketing, we were thoughtful about pricing strategy, we kind of got the best of both worlds where we established this online business while not disrupting or upsetting our wholesale partners or, kind of like our wholesale team, which at that time was the majority of the company.
It's interesting when you talk about it being a pie expanding type of venture in regards to, like, we're trying to be additive here, not take away from someone else in the strategy. I would imagine through the process of executing on that, it increased trust with those partners and with your customers too, is being able to fulfill. But then, like, fast forward a decade or so later and COVID-19 hits. And I don't know, there are certain things like as a restaurant that I like, and then COVID hits and it's like, oh my goodness, they have an app. I didn't even realize they had an app. I mean, they're doing all these things that unbeknownst to me didn't exist. And then when I needed it, I didn't need to eat at that restaurant, but when I wanted to eat at that restaurant, boom, there was an app for it. And I would imagine that there was some similarity here. Like you were sowing seeds back in 2008, 2009, when there was kind of that big boom/bubble that happened there, all the way up to COVID. All of a sudden, it's like, wow, the stores might be closing, but we're continuing to generate revenue.
Yeah. So just to give you an idea of what happened to our business throughout COVID. So heading into COVID, our business was about 85% wholesale, 15% Natori.com. We were very pleased with the growth of Natori.com over the years, but it was still mostly wholesale. So you can imagine when COVID hit, the stores shut down, the stores stopped taking shipments. It was by far the biggest existential threat to our company ever, right? We were like, oh my God, what's going to happen? We have all these goods here. The stores aren't going to take them. They're not going to sell anything. And so we, like many fashion companies, just cut everything back in terms of spending. We turned off all of our marketing. We were like, God, this could be it. And then ultimately, even without any marketing, our Natori.com business, which we've been forecasting major growth for year after year, it just it just took off. It took off because that was the only place that, other websites where the product was available was the only place customers could shop.
Yeah, there was a pent-up demand.
Yeah. So we saw this incredible growth in Natori.com. We're like, oh wow, this is good. And then trying to execute and run the warehouse during COVID, that was a challenge. But, we have, like I said, we had a very amazing, dedicated team who got that done. And then, the wholesale business started coming back. We're like, oh God. So it's funny because it turned out, what initially looked like it could be lights out turned into the biggest opportunity for the company. Then wholesale came back. Now, a lot of fashion companies have had a lot of issues over the so then what seemed like 2021 was like best case scenario. Now we've had a lot more weakness in the wholesale front, and the e-com business has kind of matured. So, the business has continued to evolve. As I mentioned, we're celebrating our 47th year as an independent family business. We've had to evolve a lot. We've had to be very nimble, in what is like a constantly changing environment, both on the wholesale and the e-com front. But like I said, we continue to do our best in what can be a challenging environment.
Well, you have a triple whammy going on to some regard, right? A family business is tough. A small business is tough. A growing a business is tough. I guess I'm going to go more in triple. Growing a business is tough. Multi-generational is tough. Then layer onto it that it's retail and it's fashion. I mean, I know many people work in the fashion world and they're like, this is a tough business. It's a tough business to be in.
It is a very tough business, and throughout my various school networks, whether it's Stanford or I went to Amherst College in Massachusetts, there aren't that many people that work in fashion, and to the degree that students or young alums are looking to learn about the business, I often get pinged just because I'm one of the few. And what I tell everybody is like, unless you have a true love for fashion, like don't get in it to make money because it is not easy. Like, I keep on saying we're 47th year as an independent family business. Brand loyalty is like lower than ever. There are upstarts coming in, heavily funded upstarts coming in all of the time, less and less, loyalty from customers, from stores. And so it's a challenge. It's a challenge. It's a labor of love, and you're only as good as your last collection and your last, how you execute on the orders that you get. So it is not easy. It's a difficult business, but we do what we can to make the most of it.
Well, one thing I've noticed under your leadership, licensing, you've done a lot more in the space of I said in the front end of the introduction, everything from, we think about things like, your clothing and your garments and things like that, but also household items now and other things have the Natori name. What's your vision for that? And how have you stepped into that water about expanding your offerings by putting your name on other products that are out there?
Yeah, so we've always we're certainly most known in the marketplace for our sleepwear and our bras and underwear. Very clear. But our goal as we've tried to expand is to really take that brand equity that we've earned in those categories and really try to become a full lifestyle brand across all categories. So we have done some of that in-house. For example, our clothing and ready-to-wear. We've been doing those collections in-house for more than a decade now. But especially as a family business that can be somewhat capital constrained by definition, expanding through licensing has really been a safer way to expand. So, finding companies that are already experts in a category that we want to get into, call it shoes, call it bedding, call it towels, legwear, hosiery, men's loungewear. Instead of us having to build infrastructure ourselves, learn and take a risk, finding companies that already know that infrastructure, already have the relationships and processes, and then making sure that we align in terms of values, making sure that they align in terms of distribution, long-term longevity of the brand. If we find good partners that already have that infrastructure, letting them do the work and us have full approval on what the designs look like, what the quality of the products look like, where they distribute those products, that's been a safer way for us to expand into different categories. So we're very fortunate to have, a number of licensed partners in a number of different categories. Our vision still is to become this full East meets West lifestyle brand. For any of you watching, please go to Natori.com or follow our Instagram at Natori. You can really see a lot of people say, God, I didn't know you guys did all this stuff. We do. We do all of this stuff. We're always trying to promote it more. But, our vision is to expand and become a true lifestyle brand across all categories, and at somewhat different price points too through different brands. And really for us, finding high quality, best in breed licensed partners has been a good tool in terms of expanding that way with relatively less risk.
I had a CEO tell me one time that in his opinion, the most powerful word in business is the word partner. And I just love to know from your perspective, whether I'm listening to this podcast and I am leading an organization, I am looking for partners out there, or maybe even looking for partners within my own organization if I'm a team member or leading a project. You mentioned a couple of things around values and vision a bit, but I imagine you have lots of people who would love to be your partner. How do you figure out the ones that are the right match?
Yeah, it is culture and values really more than anything else. When I think of licensing, as maybe some of the listeners are thinking about licensing, they probably say, oh, Natori really wants to get into this. So they're going to go look for, the best in breed in that category and figure it out from there. And it's actually, a lot of things come the other way. There's some things we've done where we might not have even ever thought of that category before. But if we or my mother really connect with the leaders of that company and find out that we share the same values and the same belief in our brand, even if they're in a category that might not have been our first thought, like having that connection and that accountability with the leaders and with the company values is more important often than the actual product category. It could be a product category that has tons of potential, but if the relationship isn't good and we don't fully trust them, I'm much more bearish on that than a product category that's like, yeah, that could work, but like if we're fully aligned with the leadership on the plan and we share the same values, like I'll take that partnership
Yeah.
over the other one, any day.
That makes sense. It's that expression. What is it like? Don't bet on the horse, bet on the jockey type of thing.
Right. Exactly.
Is that person?
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
as we wrap up the conversation, again, thanks so much for joining us. I really would like to ask a question that we're going to ask every guest who comes on the podcast, from today forward for sure. But if you have the opportunity to offer one piece of advice to our listeners, whether they're just starting out or they're further along in their careers, what would you share with them about progressing toward whatever they're looking to achieve?
You have to have an internal passion for whatever you do, and once that goes away, it's not good. I'll be honest. I am in the fashion business not because I love fashion. I'm in the fashion business because because it is a family business. I'm really excited about helping pave the future of a company. I have found my passion at Natori not because I love fashion, but in helping build a team that I really enjoy working with and really figuring out all the processes behind the scenes. It's actually been great because most people that work in fashion, they love the fashion part of it, right? They love the creative part. They love all of that input. And so I have a lot of, in fashion in general, you have a lot of similar minded creative types, which is great. That's what drives fashion. And I think what's helped is, I'm much more of a process type person, which really helps offset not just my mother, but also, a lot of other, it's an important skill set at the company. And I have a tremendous passion for that. You know, I'm busiest when things aren't working because it's like, all right, how can I figure this out? And how can we bring in the resources, team, and structure to improve that? And so that's what I find tremendous passion in. And I think, like I said, I've been part of this business organization called Young Presidents Organization, YPO, for quite some time. It has really helped shape my path as a person and as a leader. But you often see, like, some people start their companies and they're still going strong. Others lose interest, and once you lose interest, it's clear, and it's time to find your next path. So I think there always has to be this underlying drive to want to improve, to want to succeed, and want to grow your enterprise.
That's such a great point. I mean, there's a lot of people, and maybe I've had this myself sometimes, where the best day seems to be the day you got hired for the job. And then at some point, the second best day is like the day I'm not going to be here anymore. And that's just really a tragedy, right? So the ability to say, I'm going to get up every day and, it's work, it's tough. It's, I'm not trying to be Pollyanna here, but also that if I can tap into that passion, boy, you can overcome any obstacle you run into because there's like this deep well to draw from.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And there are, as I said, if any of you out there are thinking about entering the fashion world, there is never a lack of problems and lack of issues to fix. But
Absolutely.
it is our love.
Well, Ken, thanks so much for joining us today and really sharing your insights. I value you so much, not just a guest, but as a friend, and I really appreciate you taking some time with us. I know our listeners will take away valuable lessons from this conversation. So again, thanks so much for joining us.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Ken, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your insights. I know our listeners are absolutely going to benefit from them. And to all you listening, thanks for tuning in to Franklin Covey's C-Suite Conversations. My name's Dr. Patrick Leddin. Now go make it a great day.